want to do today is we want to take you through our broad process for creating a tabletop role-playing game. Each of these topics could easily be its own talk, and we just want to go through each of the, hopefully get to the end today, and share some practical advice that we ourselves learned the hard way. So as you can see, we're going to be doing ideas starting out, playtesting and iteration, and then a shorter segment at the end about crowdfunding your game. What isn't on this, that are also really important, that we're not getting into today because of time constraints, is production, so like printing your game, and distribution, shipping your game. So we'll take questions at the end. So so you just hold the questions till the end. Lastly, we design RPGs, but I think what we're talking about today, this process, is useful if you're designing any kind of game, interactive media, video game, board game. So hopefully whatever idea it is that you have, what we're speaking about today will be able to help you. So the first step, getting ideas.
Let's start with the elusive problem of getting ideas. So creative professionals often say that creativity is the perspiration of inspiration. And what that means is that you need to work hard at getting ideas in order to have good ideas. And sadly, this is true. People often say, or they often think that they're not creative, but actually that isn't really proven to be the case. Everyone has the capacity to be creative. A study conducted a few years back on identical twins showed that while IQ is largely hereditary, creativity is not. So it's nurture-based, so it's something that you can learn during your lifetime. It's a skill that you can improve. So when it comes to creativity, as I mentioned, that's something that you need to practice, and that's very important for us as game designers. Rather than waiting for the eureka moment, our approach is to work towards getting ideas in a structured manner. And the more we do that, the more likely we find we are to come to that eureka moment. And we spend a lot of time thinking about ideas as game designers.
So how do you get better at being creative? This is sort of the model we like to use to think about it ourselves. There's 3 sides to where an idea lives, and usually when people are thinking about creativity, they're looking at that imagination side. But if you are hitting that a lot and you can't make any ground, or you've got a writer's block, it's likely that it's because it's one of the 2 other sides that you're missing, either knowledge or attitude. So right now we're going to go through all 3 and give you a bit of advice about things that have worked for us in each of those sections.
Yeah, so let's start with knowledge. So when you're creating something, that is the process of dragging murky stuff out of your brain and connecting it in a new way to create something that's valuable. And the more knowledge you have, the easier that's going to be. And that's really about developing yourself as a game designer. And of course, as you might guess, the number one best way to develop yourself as a game designer is to play lots of games. And there is no substitute for this experience. Play widely. And when you play, think about the experience that you're having when you're playing the game, and discuss the game afterwards. And the side effect of that is also that it's fun. But as well as playing games, something that I have personally found very useful for developing my skills is watching a lot of actual plays. You can find there's unwatchably large numbers of them online. Unfortunately, watching unedited actual plays is much, much better for learning game design, although it may be less entertaining. And while you're watching an actual play, you can look for moments where the story really shines because of something that the mechanic has done, or where the players really seem to be enjoying themselves. And you can also look out for moments where there seems to be friction. So the players don't understand how the mechanics work, or it doesn't feel intuitive what's happening next. As well as watching actual plays, you can follow designers you admire and learn about their philosophy. And if you're interested, you can read a bit about game design theory as well. It's important that even though you may be working on one project or think that you like a certain type of game, that you read and watch widely when you're developing yourself as a designer, as you might find that the most unexpected thing that you learn from a game becomes useful in a game in a completely different context.
So the next side is this attitude side, and that's all about being in the right frame of mind, being open-minded. The best thing I can say about this sort of frame of mind is that you shouldn't try to solve the problem too early. but be open to exploring new ideas first without committing to a solution. So I guess what I mean by this is, say you're developing a Jane Austen RPG, and you start thinking to yourself that, reputation seems like a really important thing. And suddenly you're like, okay, so reputation, it rises, it falls. What effects should rising have? What effects should falling have? And, suddenly you're thinking about all of that, and suddenly you have this. You have a big, long table of different things that could happen when your reputation goes up and goes down. And we use this, and we found out it didn't quite work. It was much later we found out that it didn't quite work. Months later, when we were thinking about how this wasn't working that well, we were thinking, hey, should reputation really rise and fall? And then we decided maybe it shouldn't, and we created a whole different kind of reputation system for our game. But if we had stopped and thought about whether reputation was something that should rise and fall, if we thought about it more broadly in the first instance, without kind of going into that rabbit hole of trying to solve that problem at that stage, we would have basically had a better game sooner. And I think that's what I mean by thinking about your attitude, making sure that you don't fall into that trap of solving and analyzing your ideas at the time when you're actually ideating. Ideating is a separate activity from analyzing those ideas.
So the very last side of the triangle, imagination. So as we alluded to before, imagination is very much a skill that you practice rather than something that you are innately good at or not good at. And you can practice creativity by designing RPGs, but you can also practice it by doing anything that's creative. So writing, drawing, singing, yodeling, I don't know. The options are endless. When you're actually sitting down to generate ideas, though, there are some things that have been proven to help. The thing that will work best for you to generate ideas will depend on you as a person, but here are some things that we found important. So firstly, it is the quantity of ideas that is most important, and the quality will follow from the quantity. So when you are sitting down and you're having an idea thinking session, just come up with ideas and write them down. Don't think about whether they're good, bad, or ugly. You'll have lots of time to ruminate over the horror of some of your ideas later. It's most important to just keep going and put them out there. For us, we really like to set aside a block of time to be creative and make sure that we spend that full time thinking of ideas, not analyzing them, just really seeing how we go without any pressure. We might think of 30 ideas in a session, we might think of none. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that we sat down knowing that that was the purpose of this session. Other things that help, research has shown that creativity is sort of comes out best when you're in a bit of a relaxed state with a little bit of background noise. And for that reason, we often go to a different place to have creative sessions, so a park or a cafe or whatever it may be. So that works really well for us. As you get to know yourself, you'll find what works best for you. This may seem a bit wishy-washy, this idea, but actually in practice, as people whose professional job requires them to think of lots of ideas every day, I have found knowing myself and improving the circumstances that allow me to be creative to be the biggest thing that has made a difference in my game design. So I recommend. Yeah, for sure. So actually, Ellie's got this. Yes, so how do all of these things come together into a game? Well, the three processes on the side of the triangle, so knowledge, attitude, and imagination, these are the elements of creativity and ideation. And by optimizing all of these three sides, you give yourself the best chance to think of game ideas. So once you've had that time initially to think of the ideas that you need to start out, and you're like, all right, I've got some good stuff here. I've got the broad idea of kind of where I want to move with my game creation. What do you do with all these ideas?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about creating the brief for yourself, which is the next thing to do. A brief is really important. It is the roadmap of what you want your game to be. It is the vision of your game. It is your measuring stick later on that tells you whether you're getting closer to what you want or further away from what you want. And when you're writing a brief for yourself, there are sort of four things that we like to look at and think about. The first thing is the big idea. So, for example, that's maybe a Jane Austen role-playing game. Then, once you've got that sort of big idea, you want to tease out actually what the ideal play experience of that game is. So in our game, it was to collaboratively author a Jane Austen novel together with your friends. Even within a Jane Austen context, that could have been one of many different play experiences. It could have been explore the horrors of the marriage market, or it could have been struggle to amass wealth, or any number of infinite ideas within that space. So you have to be able to clearly articulate what the play experience of your particular game is. Once you've done that leads you to the next step, which is sort of the broad concepts related to the ideal play experience. In our case, it's maybe authorship and collaboration. Those are two broad concepts that we wanted to drill down into. And then the last thing that is very important when writing a brief is understanding the constraints that you will have to work in, be they technological if you're doing a video game, or practical or whatever it is. You need to know that your constraints as well. In our case, we're currently designing like a card game, and number of cards is a very important constraint we keep hitting up against. So once you put all four of those into a brief, I guess we're hitting this milestone. So we're going to have some milestones in this talk, which are little checkpoints to see when you're ready to move on to the next stage. So when are you done with ideating? Well, do you have a clear brief? Does this game idea excite me? Does it make you go, oh yeah, I'm really, really excited. I'm ready to play 100 versions of this game, because trust me, you will. And I guess if it's a commercial project, does this idea excite anyone else? So if you've sort of ticked off all those things, it's time to move on to the next stage, what we're talking about, playtesting.
So playtesting and iteration is how your game goes from a great idea to a fully fleshed out, complete game. And the process that you use to turn an idea into a fully fleshed out game is the iterative loop that you see before you. This is not an idea that's unique to game design at all. This comes from a product design, but it applies just as well in a role-playing game situation. And this loop has an amazing way of turning trash into treasure. It's actually quite incredible. So the way that the loop works is the first thing is that you build a playable version of your game. From there, you playtest this game as widely as you can with different people. That playtesting process gives you a lot of learnings and data. So you then spend time analyzing, drilling down into that. And from those learnings, you then generate new ideas to, guess what? Build a new version of your game so that you can test it and analyze your learnings all over again. It's great. So let's dive into the first of these processes, building. So when you build your game for the first time, for this loop, what you want to do is build your minimum viable game. That is the barest version of this game that you can build in order for it to be playable and to test the core idea of your game. And the reason why you want to do this is, firstly, you will throw so much out the window. We throw probably 50% of our game build out the window every single time we try in the first few stages. And secondly, because you actually want to leave room to discover. So when you're testing the game, players will do things that with your mechanics that you never would have imagined. And some of it is going to be great. And so you want to be like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to add that to my game and claim that it was my idea. No. But that's the reason why you want to build your minimum viable game. So some rules of thumb for building this game, minimum viable game. Think about what is most essential to the experience of your game. And you should be able to take this from the brief that you've generated earlier. And you really, really want to focus on building that when you're creating your MVG. Put your love and care here. This should actually be 80% of your first version of the game should just be the things that are most essential to the experience. Keep the options in this version very limited. You know, if you're creating a dungeon crawler, only 2 options, fighter or mage, which one you want. That's it. And the last thing to do, which is a bit of a sneaky trick, is to plug the gaps in your game with placeholder rules that you have pulled from other games. Probably don't use those in the final version, but they're great to just check whether your essential game works without needing to spend a lot of time on detailed rules that you are probably not going to need later.
Yes. Don't design your pole arm stats before you decide whether there is pole arms in your game. So the next thing is testing. So the golden rule of testing your game is to test early and to test often. We touched on why you should test early from what Haley was saying, in that you'll learn so much more from your players than you ever will be sitting there and thinking about your game. So you may as well play it and then get those faster. Then you also have to test often. So you should test with a wide group of people who have the widest perspectives on games, so that you are able to see your game from all of these different aspects, perspectives, and facets. And what that will do, it'll help you understand your game better, and it'll make it a better game. Often when you play test with people who have radically different opinions from you, they'll actually be able to kind of fill you in on your own blind spots. Something you would never consider is only going to just be discovered by talking to other people about it, not from yourself, because that's your blind spot. That's one of the benefits about collaborating when you're creating a game. Haley and I can pick up each other's blind spots, but we have kind of similar perspectives again as well on games. So you actually really need to play with a wide variety of people. And then, when you do playtest, make sure you do collect that feedback. Spend some time thinking about what questions you want to ask players and make a feedback sheet that you give them, and record your sessions. We've been like, oh, we don't need to record this one, but then we've always regretted that decision. So every time you play test, you should at least have an audio recording of it or a video recording of it. It's just so much, it's a good insurance, and you'll be able to go back and analyze those sessions closely after the fact. Speaking of analyzing.
Yes, so the learn section. So this is where you devote time to analyzing your feedback so that you can work out what is wrong with your game and what is great about your game, and develop new ideas to go into the build. So when you are in a situation where you have played a lot and you have a lot of feedback as well as your own personal experiences and your recordings, what you need to do is look for trends, not individual instances. So trends in feedback and trends in people's experiences will tell you where you need to focus. So for example, when we were testing Good Society, we found a lot of people, remember that reputation table we saw earlier? We found a lot of people tell us that table wasn't great, and that it was slowing down their game and it wasn't intuitive to use. So that's how we knew that was an area that we needed to improve and fix. Whereas we had one individual sort of as an outlier tell us that they didn't think our game had enough mechanical crunch. And that sort of was counterintuitive to sort of the focus of our game and a lot of other elements in our game. So that was a piece of feedback that we decided to put aside. When you have sort of feedback that sits in the middle ground, so you've had a few people mention it, but you are not sure whether or not you should take it into consideration, I would recommend thinking about it as a question rather than as a solution. So it can be useful to say, what has caused that person to say that X, Y, Z doesn't work? And more often than not, you might find that it's a completely different part of your game or a different part of how the game is approached that's actually the problem rather than the exact thing that they have mentioned in their feedback. And going over your plays can be helpful for this. So when you're looking through your play sessions, the things you should look for from this convenient acronym, FUCS. Firstly, points of friction. Things that where people have grated against your game, where they've tried to do a certain thing and they're not able to, or they're forced to do a certain thing they don't really want to. Secondly, unintuitive mechanics, where people just don't, the way that the system works doesn't line up with what they're trying to do in the fiction, or they don't really understand how the mechanics are meant to be used. And when I say mechanics, what I'm referring to is really the rules of the game. Thirdly, things that are confusing, things that people are like, hang on, am I meant to do this now or later? Does this connect to this other thing? Is this ability even? So if you find people being confused, that's something you should look out for. And lastly, and this is particularly in the later stage of your game design, things that slow and bog your game down a lot, like the aforementioned table. So you really want your game to flow well, and anything that's slowing it down is going to get in the way of that. So when you're doing this process, don't be afraid to throw out what you thought was your best idea. Our best ideas are never our best ideas, as it turns out. And then that's when you start to take things back to the drawing board and start thinking again, and this time with a more problem-solving mindset of how you can move your game forward to the next build, the next improved build, so you can test and find out your best ideas, your worst ideas all over again. Yeah, and basically you keep working through that process until you have a game. Oh no, a scheduled scan.
Oh no, run later.
Run later.
Phew.
Crisis averted.
Crisis averted. The milestone here isn't, don't aim to be done. You're never done, let me tell you that. There's always something else to do, something else to improve. And if you're aiming to be done, chances are you're going to be stuck there for a really long time, if you're a perfectionist especially. And instead, what we feel is more helpful at this stage is move on when you're proud of what you have. When you are proud to share your game to friends, family, and the wider world, that's when you should move on. Because it is never, never, never done. There are playwrights who have their play put on and then change their plays afterwards. So you know that iteration doesn't stop when you release the game. So that's our advice there. Move on when you're proud of what you have. It's important to be proud of your work as well. And the last stage that we're going to talk to is about crowdfunding your game.
So crowdfunding, first of all, you don't have to crowdfund your game, obviously, if it's a game that you're just producing for fun. But secondly, it's not the only commercial model that works either. You can also decide to release your game and build up a following over time. Crowdfunding is quite stressful, and you do have backers who are on your case and expect you to deliver your product on time. Crazy. And I like having that deadline, and I love having people to talk about the project with and to play test with. So crowdfunding has really worked and makes sense for us, but it's not the best way for everybody. But that said, there is a lot you can say about crowdfunding your game. But today we're just going to focus on what we think are the two most important elements of a successful crowdfunding campaign. And that is marketing and your funding page. So marketing. It's definitely not the case in role-playing that you can simply build it and they will come. You really need to share your game with the world if you want people to be interested in it. But the way you market a role-playing game is probably different to the way you might market other products. So before you start your crowdfunding campaign, here's three things that I would recommend. Firstly, it's very important you have a sign-up list. So put together a web page with a bit of information about your game, and somewhere that people can sign up to be notified when it launches. Secondly, I would highly recommend having a playable version of your game that you can share before the crowdfunding campaign. This does not and shouldn't be the full version of your game. It's really a sort of what we call a quick start version, which is playable for 1 or 2 sessions just to give people an idea of your game. And the reason why this is important is because the chief reason people decide or not to back or not to back your game is based on whether or not they think it's going to be fun for them. And there is actually no better way of showing people that your game is going to be fun for them than giving them the opportunity to play it, or at least read it and contemplate whether or not they think it's going to be fun. And the other great thing about having a shareable version of your game is that people will play it with their friends. And so that starts word of mouth getting around about your game as well. And the last thing I'd recommend before the campaign is playing your game with as many people as you can. Not only is it fun, and not only is it useful for making your game, but we found that the people that we play our game with are usually the most excited ones when the campaign launches. So that's very valuable.
So now you know why we said you have to be really excited about playing your game a couple of times. So the other thing that you're going to be putting together is a funding page if you're crowdfunding your game. The sort of top tips I have for that is to start looking at other pages first. Write a list of why they do what they do well, and then make sure you do those things too. There's also a lot of resources online about, I think Kickstarter have their own page about how to put together a page kind of thing. So it is helpful to just look if in your product category about other pages. If you're doing a board game, look at other board game pages, etc. And make sure you make a checklist and do those things too. The other thing that I would say is to invest in good art and graphic design, because the aesthetics of your page is really important and first impressions do count. So it's a way that you can start building trust with the people who are going to back your game, and a way to show your professionalism. The very last thing, and probably the most important thing, is kind of what Haley touched on, is to show people that your game is fun through the page, to actually highlight all of the things that make your game fun and unique, which you should know from playtesting, and to make sure that those things are presented on your page via videos, images, or in the text itself. So that is the one thing that you do want to convey to people when you're marketing your game.
Yeah, so milestone, before you start your crowdfunding campaign, is your page ready to go? Have you got a decent sized sign-up list that's going to give you momentum on that first day? And also be prepared mentally, because it's a bit of a tough roller coaster ride. And if you're anything like us, you need to cook 2 weeks of meals and put them in the freezer if you ever hope to eat again. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of what we have. To conclude, what we want you to take away from today is we've talked a lot about our process, but the best thing to do is to practice these lessons for yourself. To do that, I mean, what we did and what I think really works well is to start some small scoped game projects. And these are like shorter projects. You can see we did 6, 12, 5 pages, and the turnaround times should be, a month at most. And that way you can practice lots of times all of these skills. We still do this today. We still release all of these free games on our websites periodically. But nowadays there's also game jams that are organized online on sites like itch.io, and those are really great too. They're usually like 1 or 2 weeks long. There's like a theme. Some of them have prizes and awards, and there's just a community who are also designing at the same time as you. So doing those kind of small scope projects are really, really good to practice your skills. You're never gonna like start carpentry by building a house. You're gonna start with something smaller, and that's the same principle that we use in game design.
So that's what we've really got to talk about today. We talked a lot about the process of designing a game from beginning to end. If you would like to learn a bit more about us, we're story brewers, role-playing on basically everywhere you can imagine on the internet, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we have a website. And if you are designing a game, we also have a mentorship program as well. So there is details about that on our website. You can check it out. And yes, we are going to be sharing this talk online later as well. But for now, if anyone has any questions, we'd be more than happy to chat about them.
Yep. Specific, general?
Cool. So just to repeat the question on the microphone, in case anyone didn't hear it. So where did the idea come from for our Jane Austen role-playing game, and what were 2 very surprising moments that we've had? So the idea actually came when we were watching Don't Judge, the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice. I love the BBC version just as much, but I would staunchly argue that both are good versions. Both of them are good versions. And we kind of found ourselves thinking like, oh, what would I do if I was in this situation? If this was the world that I lived in and these were the people that I knew. And when you find yourself thinking, hey, what would I do in this situation? That's usually a good sign that there could be a role-playing game in this. Because that's what role-playing is really about in many ways. In terms of the most unusual things, or I guess the most interesting experiences we've had, I'll start and then I'll let Vic chime in. Probably the most interesting experience I had was the level of serious emotional investment that people put into this game. Because the first time we played this game, and we played it with a bunch of our friends, and we were like, this is going to be hilarious. Let's have a fun time. And we did. It was a very funny game, very sort of Oscar Wilde style. But when we started playtesting it more widely, what we found is that people actually really wanted to invest in their character and the emotional journey that their characters had throughout the game. And that was actually the thing that interested us as well. So when we were building this game, as it went on, we increasingly changed the tone and the mechanics in the game to suit that sort of emotional character investment. And I think the result was a game that I'm much more proud of, and I'm much more happy to play. I'm much more happy to play 100 times and have subsequently. So that was probably what stood out as something I didn't necessarily expect, but something that I'm glad that happened.
And what I picked up from your question as well, you mentioned that, what would my party do, D&D party do to this game? We sort of had a similar problem actually when we first started in some of our earlier iterations, because it is, like Haley was saying, can be taken into that more emotional space, and we didn't always just like want to take the opinion of like, let's just laugh at this. So we actually built into all of that kind of thing, ended up into this collaboration phase before you actually even start playing the game. The very first thing you do when you play Good Society, you sit down as a group all together and you answer questions like, what is the tone of this game going to be? And then you have 3 options to pick. You can either pick fast, so for the people who do want to play that game, you're all on the same page. This farcical tone is what we want to do. You could pick a romantic comedy, or you could pick drama, where it is going to be serious and emotional. And there's the question of if you're going to use the gender power balance, and the options are like his standard historical patriarchy, gender norms off, or gender norms in reverse. These options we set out at the very beginning of the game, and then as you sort of the game works through these phases, there's a phase to check that you're still on tone, to have that discussion with your group. So it's a way that we built into this game to kind of make sure people are all playing on the same page, essentially. Yeah.
How do you turn an idea into the gameplay aspect? So I'm just going to ask a clarifying question here. Is that about how you get from like the concept, like a Jane Austen game, into a game that feels like mechanically mirrors like that broad idea? Yeah. Did you want to start on that one?
Let me collect my thoughts.
Okay. Well, I'll start. So what we will generally do is think about the experience we want to create. So the experience of creating your own Jane Austen novel. And then we think about what are the essential elements of the Jane Austen experience that we really want to mirror in the game. So the very first thing that came out for us was characters have desires and relationships. And these are the 2 things that ground a character in Jane Austen's world. Everyone wants something, they want to marry a certain gentleman or restore their reputation or whatever it may be. And everyone has strong relationships that are pulling them down or helping them get by. But other things we identified that were important parts of the experience were reputation, rumor and scandal, and a bit later on, the writing of letters. That one was probably, I love it. I think it's a great addition to the game. But so what we were thinking was, what are the essential elements of Jane Austen? And from there, we thought, all right, if we were going to put these elements into a role-playing game, what would it look like? And we started to think about various ways that we could do that. So that was sort of the process that we used. And then we tried those and found they weren't very good and thought of new ones.
Yeah, there's lots of trial and error, but I guess what I would add to that is the second part of that, which is about, so then you have these like reputation or rumor and scandal letters, all of these ideas floating around. How do you actually turn those into mechanics or gameplay? And that is actually, I think, the knowledge part of that triangle. The more you read and play games and analyze them and see, okay, if I have a framework and a structure to my game, how does that change the gameplay experience? Does that make people stay on track more about this? Does it impact their ability to choose where the story is going? The more knowledge you have, the more tools you are equipped with to turn that idea into a working part of your game. So if you can't think of any good ideas, or you're not sure how else to handle this, chances are if you read more widely, play more games, think about those things, you might be able to see other ways of doing it for yourself. Yeah, so I would say it's a knowledge issue.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing to that. One thing that's very important for us to think about is, what do we want people to do during our game? And this is sort of on 2 levels. What do we want the players to be doing during our game, and what do we want the characters to be doing during our game? And when you stop and think about what do we want people to be doing, then you can think, all right, what's going to incentivize people to do that mechanically? So, are we going to give people a bonus if they do this? Are we going to give people a currency they can use to spend? So, for example, in Good Society, we want people to orchestrate plot points, right? We want people to be able to change the world and the situation that's happening. So the way we did this is by giving people a currency that they can spend to make changes in the story. And we also were thinking, hey, you know what would be awesome if people wanted to orchestrate their own misfortunes and bring their downfalls upon themselves. And as players, bring downfall upon their own character. And so that fed into the narrative currency. So whenever somebody does something to your character that you would rather not occur, they can pay that narrative currency to you. It's called a resolve token. And you can accept that if you choose for that thing to occur. And then you can give it back just as good as you got later on. So the question was, before the game goes into playtesting, do we have any way of finding out whether there are rules that are unbalanced or create things that are weaker or stronger than they should be? So I would probably say that we find that out like almost always through playtesting, but the one thing that V and I do is test the game like dry. Like we have, so for example, our game coming up, we mentioned was a card game. It's called Fight with Spirit, and it's about high school sport. And that has a sort of a heavier mechanical element to it than the Jane Austen game. And so V and I just sit there being like, you won the match. You know, like we'll walk through the mechanics of the game without the storytelling element, just sort of stimulate them and check whether or not they work. And that's really all you can do before you play test, but you will always find out new information.
Yeah, if you're really good at actuarial maths, you can build your own probability engine for some of these things, but I don't think that often tells you the full story. I think I really do think that playtesting is the best way to get a sense of that. Yeah. So we do sometimes, we sometimes do and try to guess, but we never see the full picture anyway until we playtest. So test early, test often.
Yes, that's right. Any last questions?
Good.
Well, good. Well, thank you guys so much for coming today. And yes, we will be